Chasing the Moon, the Crescent City Connection, is made possible by WGBH.
30 seconds and counting. 25 seconds. 20 seconds and counting. 10, 9.
Well, we were in the Cold War. The Russians were going to the moon. We, as President Kennedy said, we wanted to go to the moon because it's hard.
It was an exciting time. It was a very exciting time. People worked around the clock when they had to. Nobody cared. All they could remember is that we want to beat the Russians. We want to be the first man on the moon.
The space race was on. Helping lead the charge were the employees at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans and the John C. Stennis Space Center on the Mississippi Gulf Coast.
The large booster that took the entire stack off the ground in order to break the force of gravity was built at Michoud. When it left Michoud, it was a completed vehicle ready to fly. We would ship it first to Stennis, we'd fire it at Stennis, make sure it all worked right.
One of the things that kept the Russians from getting to the moon was they never built a place to test their rocket stages as a whole stage. We did that here. So when we put a rocket on the launch pad, it had a very considerable test pedigree behind it. The Russians' moon rocket did not, and it failed every time they tried to launch it.
The scope of the mission benefited scores of local residents.
Michoud was one of the most powerful and greatest economic boosts to the New Orleans whole area. You were able to support your family, you was able to enjoy life.
The space program changed lives and landscapes, and with it, New Orleans and Gulf Coast residents joined the quest with the nation in chasing the moon. Hello and welcome to the WYES Charlie and Jeanette Kornman Performance Studio and Chasing the Moon, the Crescent City Connection. I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Joining me is our studio audience, many of whom either worked on the space program locally or they still do. Also with me are our panelists, my guest here at the table, local author and historian Cindy Manto, who has written books and gathered quite the collection of archival photos about Michoud Assembly Facility and the Stennis Space Center. Dr. Calvin Mackie, Executive Director of STEM NOLA, which is helping to nurture the next generation of scientists and engineers with STEM NOLA Saturdays and other programs. And Dr. Renee Horton, who also works in the community for STEM education and STEM outreach, and she is the NASA Space Launch System Quality Engineer at the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans. But before we get into our discussion about that role that our local residents have played in space exploration, let's do a brief refresher, or maybe for some, a revelation about how the space program took up residence here. It was the early 1960s. President John F. Kennedy informed the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, that the U.S. would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. But facilities were needed to meet the needs of space exploration. 2 sites were selected in South Louisiana and Mississippi, which became part of what was known as the Space Crescent.
Space Crescent often has to do with the geographic area here on the Gulf Coast, which has been just a plethora of work over the years for the testing of rockets in Mississippi, the integration and manufacture of rockets here in New Orleans, and then of course around into Florida, the launch pad for our national space program.
The Rocket Assembly Facility was established at Michoud, on a site in eastern New Orleans named after one of its earliest owners, Antoine Michoud. As the U.S. readied for World War II, a portion of the land was acquired by the U.S. government. Higgins Industries built aircraft in the huge buildings constructed on the site. After the war, it saw various uses, but with the advent of the space race, and after heavy lobbying by then New Orleans Mayor Victor Skiro, the site, with its access to waterways and 43 acres under one climate-controlled roof, was taken over by NASA. First called Michoud Operations, it soon became the Michoud Assembly Facility, where rockets would be built. But the rockets would need to be tested somewhere. The site would need to be isolated, accessible to waterways and roads, have a suitable climate, and be close to Michoud. A location along the Pearl River in southwestern Mississippi was selected. About 700 families were relocated so that the Mississippi testing facility could move into the 116,000-acre site, enough to absorb noise and vibration. It would come to be called the John C. Stennis Space Center, named after a powerful U.S. senator. With that, both Louisiana and Mississippi would occupy spots on the Space Crescent, and their residents would be given the opportunity to be part of an out-of-this-world pioneering effort that continues to this day. And Cindy, I'm going to start the talking with you because as we just saw, Michoud and Stennis, real important parts of our space program, and there are other facilities too, of course. So just quickly, can you describe what the other ones are and where they
the other facilities, beginning with Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Michoud reports to Marshall. Stennis Space Center now is a center. It originally reported to Marshall. NASA needed a launch facility, Cape Canaveral, a manned spaceflight laboratory, Johnson Space Center.
All right, and Johnson Space Center is where the astronauts actually do most of their training,
Yes.
from what I understand.
Yes.
So it used to be called the Space Crescent in those earlier days.
Yes.
It's not so much now, but we have all of these different facilities engaged in the space program and other things happening around the country too. But let's talk now, since this is our home area of Stennis and Michoud. Michoud, as you know, I backgrounded, and you certainly backgrounded a lot in your books, which Michoud Assembly Facility and the Stennis Space Center. The Michoud site had, you know, different lives over the course of the history of New Orleans, and then ultimately became what it is today. So can you briefly tell us about that?
Michoud started as a land grant from the King of France, Louis XV. It was a sugar plantation. It was leased land for hunting, and in 1940 it became portion of it was sold for about $76,000 cash to the U.S. government to build a facility for Liberty ships by Andrew Jackson Higgins, designed by Alfred Kahn of Detroit, who specialized in large unobstructed spaces.
And that's what ultimately it became.
Right.
And that was just really one of the lures of it, is that we had this 43-acre building under a roof, air conditioned. And
Yes.
so that was a real good lobbying point.
And
for
low humidity.
Right. That was a really good lobbying point for then Mayor Victor Skiro when NASA, you know, came calling, trying to find a place to begin to answer the call of the president to get us on the moon by the end of the decade.
Yes. New Orleans was competing with 28 other cities at the time. It was kind of a done deal. Von Braun was bent on having New Orleans because of the location and size of the facility. It was really the only building that could handle such large rockets. But to be sure, Mayor Vic Skiro, who liked to say, if it was good for New Orleans, I'm for it,
Right.
organized a NASA New Orleans coordinating committee of 30 local leaders, business leaders, to make sure we got it, and we did.
And we did. Did you have
Yes.
something to comment on that? It looked like you had something to say on that. Indeed, we did it, but I wanted to get Renee in here just quickly, because you're there right now and you're seeing what's going on with Michoud, so over at the facility. And so that area does have a lot going on, not just with NASA, but there are other businesses and things going on over there at the Michoud site.
We do. We have NCAM, which is there, which is dealing with LSU, and so they're there. They're actually training on the welding facilities as well. We have BK Machinery that's actually in there. Vivace actually shares that space with us as well. And then, of course, Lockheed Martin and Boeing in there as the biggest tenants.
And so that's one other thing that I wanted you to mention,
Yes.
Cindy, is that we hear about Lockheed Martin, we heard about Martin Marietta, and Boeing, Chrysler. So there have been different industries that have worked on the program there at Michoud.
Yes. Chrysler had a presence during the Korean War, building V-12 tank engines. When NASA took over Michoud, they came back and built the S-1s. S-1 rockets. Boeing built the S-1Cs. Martin Marietta later became Lockheed Martin, built the external tank for the shuttle.
So all of the work that was done over there ultimately built these boosters that helped get us ultimately first to the moon. So the Michoud Assembly Facility continues to be a big part of the nation's space program. We recently spoke to NASA's resident manager at Michoud and also to an engineer who started his career there when the Apollo program was in its infancy.
Within the first few years, once NASA was established, Dr. Wernher von Braun came down to New Orleans area and commissioned the Michoud Assembly Facility to help in the manufacture of the huge tankage that would be part of ultimately the Apollo program. That was in 1961. Subsequently, it's been part of all the major space programs from that time forward. Originally, it was called Michoud Operations, but as it was clear that the magnitude of the effort that would be going on here would be making massive rocket pieces that ultimately would have to be barged to the launch pad, unable to go even over the road system. It was clear that this was going to be an assembly factory with parts coming from all over the country from hundreds and hundreds of different vendors and subcontractors.
When I arrived at Michoud, what it looked like. It was an abandoned factory. They had built parts for tank engines for the Korean War. One of the reasons the factory was chosen is it has 40-foot truss height, so you can build something very big in it. And the other reason was, of course, the port that we had where you could ship something any size just about anywhere in the world. So you had this gigantic factory, 40-foot high, completely clear. It was just gigantic when you looked at it. I can still remember the first day I traveled out to New Orleans East, and it was nothing there. I mean, it was a chef highway that just went through essentially a wilderness. The Michoud plant fundamentally only had the main building and a couple of office buildings. Parking lots were shell, like the shells that they used to have back in the day that they would dredge out of Lake Pontchartrain. The fence was made out of cross ties from a railroad with fencing around it. It was really not anything to look at, you know.
So from that time forward, we've been making first stage boosters for the early Apollo, the space shuttle era, and looking forward, the Space Launch System first stage booster called the core stage. Michoud Assembly Facility is on the east end of New Orleans, and we are fortunate to be part of the industrial canal system that enables these huge spacecraft to be barged down through the canal system and ultimately out into the Gulf of Mexico. The barges we use have been massive. The booster is the largest, often the backbone of the rocket, whose function is to have a heavy thrust that gets this payload, whether it's astronauts or other types of cargo, for instance, the space station components, or the Hubble Space Telescope, those kinds of things, through the heavy air and then up into low Earth orbit. And in some cases, for both the Apollo program and the upcoming Space Launch System program, it will be beyond low Earth orbit to translunar and lunar sorties and ultimately to interplanetary locations like Mars.
The initial program called Apollo, it was two phases. One, you used the vehicle called the S-1B, which was built by Chrysler, which took up about 40% of the Michoud factory. And then you had the S-1C that was built by Boeing, which took up the other 60%. And the whole idea was to test all of the rockets and ancillary equipment it took to get to the moon. And that activity took place all over the country. I mean, we worked a lot at Stennis with the engines, and eventually we fired the completed S-1C. The entire booster was fired at Stennis. The big contribution Michoud made was to build that gigantic booster. It was 138 feet tall, and it was 33 feet in diameter, so it was huge. And it was the critical part in order to get that mass off the ground. When it left Michoud, it was a completed vehicle ready to fly. Back then, there were several hundred of NASA folks at Michoud. So you had, off the top of my head, you probably had 300 or 400 NASA, you had 7,500 Boeing, 3,500 Chrysler, and you had 2,500 Mason Russ, and then you had just loads of contractors that came in to do the construction work and that sort of thing.
Our workforce in that time frame was close to 12,000 people on any given day. Folks that worked everything from high-end science down to technicians and admin and people who did all those things in between, all of which helped us create this massive rocket that went out the door and ultimately to then Cape Canaveral, in the near future, Kennedy Space Center.
The initial staffing probably came from all over the country because they needed a lot of engineers and they needed them fast. And Louisiana was not in a position to provide all the engineers that were required. However, the initial job was to take the 43-acre abandoned Higgins building and convert it into a rocket factory. It was an exciting time. It was a very exciting time. People worked around the clock when they had to. Nobody cared. All they could remember is that we want to beat the Russians. We want to be the first man on the moon. We built 15 S-1Cs, and there were 13 missions, so 2 of them didn't fly. Interesting thing though, every S-1C was successful. There was never a failure on the S-1C program. So, or the Apollo. Or the Apollo had other failures, but not related to the booster that we built.
In those days in the 60s, boy, that really was exciting during that space program. It was so exciting just to see each launch. And along with the excitement, though, at Michoud came real opportunities, job opportunities that hadn't existed before in this community. And also it really stimulated community growth.
Yes, I remember, I wasn't around, I was born in the late 60s, but I remember in the 70s when I was like 9, 10 years old, my uncle worked at Folgers Coffee. And I used to say, he used to bring me out to the facility and we would work at his facility, but I look over and see NASA. And he'd say, you know, they have engineers over there too. And we would see the tanks coming out and I got to meet the technicians and the engineers. And to this day, I believe that's what inspired me to be an engineer. Many of my friends who wanted to make things rather than making oil, if we wanted to make things, all of us aspired to go to like Detroit and make cars. Yeah. But really, NASA was the only place where we can go and make something. So the fact that that facility was there, spurred the growth of the engineering school at University of New Orleans. Many of the technicians, skilled tradesmen, and engineers walked straight out of UNO and straight over there, you know, to meet the need of the workforce. And the work that they did too is just amazing, considering how the space program grew from the work that was done by the folks here. We heard, you know, the workforce was really quite sizable back then in the 60s. You're there right now. Yeah. It's a little bit smaller now, though.
It's a lot smaller, and that's what kind of, when they said, as much as they said 12,000, I think they said the number was, and I'm thinking we're about 2,500 now. It's a really personal, intimate space now, so I couldn't imagine another, you know, 12,000 of us running around there. So,
well, we're going to hear in just a moment from some of the retirees who were working there at that time, and they just all emphasized that it was really a friendly family environment. But also with that, with these opportunities, it did help sort of stimulate growth in our community. It sort of helped grow New Orleans East, helped grow Slidell as well, and it continues to do so.
Right, when people look at the challenges we have in the city of New Orleans in terms of economic development, especially in the East, the people who were not here 10, 20 years ago don't remember the days when NASA was there and Michoud was there and the communities was booming, the stores was booming, the mall was booming, because you had 12,000 people and they coming in and out on a daily basis, up the interstate, up and down Chef Mature, creating that economic viability that communities need.
Right, go ahead.
And that's what we need now. I mean, we still have that space. You know, we still need to work hard to bring other industries there now to do the work. The challenge that we have now, though, like Renee said, she remembered when we talked about 12,000 workers, she says 2,500 now. With automation, you don't need as many workers. So now we need more companies doing more things that they can collaborate such that we can have more workers move into the area to get the economic viability that we need in Eastern New Orleans.
And we're going to be talking a little bit more about how we need to nurture and grow those workers too, and I know that you're really involved with that. And something personal to you, I mean, Randy Tassan noted that, you know, we needed to bring people in to
Yes.
to take the jobs, because we just didn't have enough people in New Orleans to take those jobs, including from around the world. And
People
your
came
husband
in-
kind of came into, into
Yes, he
that.
did. He did not even attend his graduation, his college graduation. He came down for the job. Yes, he's from Italy. And over the years, we've had people from Scotland, England, India, everywhere. Yeah.
So Apollo really worked for you.
Definitely did. Okay, well, many New Orleans families found new job opportunities when Michoud Operations began building their workforce. This hit really close to home for WYES Outreach Manager Monica Turner. Her mom, who's in the audience, howdy, Miss Barthay, and her other family members work there. Monica recently invited some of their now retired co-workers to come to the station to share their memories, some of which date to the early days of the space program.
The space program at the Michoud Assembly Facility meant jobs for many New Orleans residents. A group of Michoud retirees came to WYS to share stories about their years on the job, and for most, it was for decades.
47 years.
30 years with Lockheed Martin.
Started in 1964, ended up in 2005.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you got there, how was that training for you guys? How did they do that?
When I started, we was in the class, and they showed us how to solder, and that's how I started soldering. And we had to put them into this, what you call
Connectors.
it? In the connectors.
We did have a training department. They taught the basic blueprint, the shop math, measuring tools, different type of things that you would use on the job.
We started at the Boeing Company. That's where we got our basic training in electrical and mechanical technicians. We were so exact. Everything had to be just so. We worked in thousandths of an inch. Wow. Yeah.
It was always open communications. They didn't want to assume that you knew anything, but they wanted to definitely hear from you.
And we didn't know anything about soldering, you know.
You remember bifurcated terminals?
I remember.
You remember?
Yes, I remember bifurcated terminals. So during these bifurcated terminals, we would use one wire at a time. And I thought to myself, I said, well, this is taking too much time. So what I did, I put 2 and 3 wires together. And they look at me like, what are you doing? And I showed them. And a year or so after that, they paid me for the suggestion that I turned in.
That you would use more than one.
Exactly, exactly.
It was a mission to get the man on the moon. So did you feel a camaraderie? Did you feel like everybody was collaborating together?
Right.
Oh, yes,
I
indeed.
think so.
Right.
Oh, yes. Yes.
I think everybody took pride in what they'd done.
Right.
Yeah, we worked with the planners. The planners sent paperwork to us, what we should do, and we told them what we could or couldn't do.
Did an astronaut ever come to see?
Yes, they did.
More than once. Yes,
They did.
indeed.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, they did.
So you got a chance to meet them, talk with them.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So did it give you a feeling that I want to see him arrive safely and come
Right.
back?
Yes,
That's
that
right.
was the main thing for them to return safely. One of the biggest things we had safety meetings every week. We had to, yeah.
As far as them, if they would give you an award, a lot of times they would have an astronaut presented to you.
Come on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow, that is so amazing.
Michoud was one of the most powerful and greatest economic boosts to the New Orleans whole area. It created so much other things than just having a job. You bought houses, you sent your kids to school, you were able to support your family, you was able to enjoy life. That was not seen to that great extent prior to Michoud.
Right, we could take vacations.
You take
Oh,
vacations.
yes, indeed.
I mean, that was the best thing to hit New Orleans at that time. The
We met
best.
a lot of people from different, from Seattle, came from Seattle, different places we met. Wichita, all over, you know.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And we found out that people came from different places, and we found out that through talking all day and laughing all day and working all day, how much we were alike.
I started in '81 making $6 an hour. Over that 30 years, I left there at $45 an hour. So I was able to put my children through good schools and provide a good life for them.
You ever see the shuttle?
Yes.
Did you see the launch?
Yeah.
Yes.
You saw the launch?
Yes.
I sure did.
It would go up. It would go up, and there was clouds and clouds of just white clouds. And then it went away. Hydrogen and oxygen, that was our fuel. It just disappeared. It was just a beautiful thing.
How did you feel when that?
I felt that I really wanted to do my work right and good because I knew that there were human lives going up and they had to come back down. So that made me want to do so much better.
Always exciting because we, in the different shops around the plant, we stopped what we were doing, went to the monitors that were in different shops, and you witnessed the flight. And with that came a fullness, you know, it felt like, man, hey, I made a contribution to that, and it was successful.
Yes.
And at the launch itself, when you witness it, you feel it. It's a loud rumble. It's like it's rumbling inside of you when it's taking off, and you actually feel it.
But with those feelings of pride, there also came the sorrow of the shuttle disasters. The first was the Challenger.
We were watching a launch. If I'm not mistaken, it was January 28th. And it went off so beautifully as usual. And our supervisor walked off. He said, we did it again. And everybody was saying, yeah, and all of a sudden, something went wrong.
Yep.
The thing did like this. Hey, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. The thing usually just goes straight up. That was a different thing. We watched television all day. When I went home, I was watching television all day. What happened? What happened? It was awful, awful. As good as it felt, is how bad it felt when it failed. Yeah.
That failure that took place was the O-ring. It subsequently, the first failure. But that second failure of the Columbia, where the astronauts were flying back in, and it blew up over Texas and scattered debris over Louisiana. Because of the stringent documentation we have of stamping every aspect of the work, they were able to backtrack and determine who applied that foam to the tank that blew off and struck the shuttle. That really sent us into looking deep into ourselves and say, we got to do everything right. That took us close to 2 years before we can get another launch off, but we paid more attention to detail than ever before. Every detail was critical.
I love what I did. I really, really loved it. And I would advise anybody now, if you are going to do any kind of work, I don't care what it is, do it to the best of your knowledge. Just don't hurry up and throw something together. People's lives depend on these things, you know, and I wouldn't want to fly in anything that somebody didn't do right. No way.
The world should be thanking you, because I can't even imagine without email or a laptop. I can't imagine you guys doing that without all the things we have today to get the job done. So thank you very much, and I know the world appreciates what you did.
Oh, thank you.
We appreciate them letting us do it.
I enjoyed it.
And we all certainly echo what Monica said there. Thank you for all of your work. I know you were delighted to see the harness ladies as you come.
I was like, you know, when you're in the factory, you hear all the stories that actually go around. And one of the stories, no matter what, when we started having wire harness problems, was they would say, okay, we just need to get our wire harness ladies back, right? And I kept saying, what? And they's like, well, there was a group of ladies who set up in the mezzanine and actually put the wire harnesses together, and you didn't do anything to those wire harnesses without consulting them. And so, you know, to say that the world need to thank them, we do need to thank them, because that was it is so important that that is actually done right. And so to hear that that group of ladies did that. And to hear them say they do it with so much pride, I'm sitting here with goosebumps because I resonate with that. You know, it's you do your job with pride, you love what you do, but the idea that they were doing that way before computers, way before technology, way before any of that, so to hear we can't do it now, I'm always blown away, because the wire harness ladies always found a way to get it done. So it was just amazing being able to run into them. I can't wait to get back in the factory and be like, I ran into the wire harness ladies today.
Thanks, they're here. They're here in our audience today. So you see, you guys really did blaze a trail, a trail that continues. Yes, indeed. And you know, we did hear, and Richard talked about the space shuttle disasters in the Columbia, which did have a bearing on the work that had been done at Michoud. Stopped for about 2 years or so, and the focus was on, let's get this right. Cindy, your husband, Fulvio, who's in our audience right now, too, is an engineer who worked on that. Welcome, Fulvio. Can you sort of explain how did you all feel and what were you all determined to do?
Of course, you know, when we heard about the accident, you know, we were totally shocked. We actually had seen the movies and the photographs the day after the launch, that a piece of foam coming from the bipod area had struck the left wing of the Columbia, the leading edge of the Columbia ship. So we started right away to actually meet, and before they returned to the launch site, to come up with a solution to actually remedy the problem. We were also struck by the fact that the program management at NASA declined to actually inspect the vehicle, because we were all expecting, that we would find out what kind of damage we got to the wing leading edge, so we could, do something like Apollo 13, go into the panic mode and actually help them out. But that was declined. So we didn't know until actually the return to flight, return to Earth, that the shuttle had disintegrated. And we went into a lockup mode where everything is sealed, documents are sealed and controlled. And very few of us were actually allowed to go into the facility. Shortly after, it took us about 6 months to exonerate every other piece of hardware that we had on the ET. And then after that, following the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, we actually started designing solution to actually eliminate the foam from the bipod, which ultimately we did. It took about 2 years, over 2 years actually, to return to flight. And the first flight after we get back, we lost another piece of foam from a different area. And then we took another year, because also of Katrina, the famous hurricane, to actually get rid of that foam and return to flight again. And then we didn't have major foam problems since then.
And so the flights continued, and the space shuttle continued for how much longer?
Until 2011.
2011.
July 2011 is when the last flight was there.
All right,
That's
so you guys were
135.
focused to get it right, to get the problem fixed. Thank you, Fulvio, very
You're
much
welcome.
for sharing that story. You had a comment?
Yes, I just, you're speaking about the Columbia disaster, and I remember I was in engineering school at the time, just starting out, and my first internship was supposed to be with Martin Marietta out in Michoud. And I tell people I was downsized on my first job because after the space shuttle incident, we received a letter saying that they had suspended not only the operations but internships. But I want to add that that accident changed the way schools began to teach engineering. I mean, still to this day, that accident is a case study where professors bring up and say, this is what can happen when you don't pay attention to details.
So a bearing on how we live today, like you said, how it's being taught, engineering being taught.
It's still impacting the way we teach engineering to this day.
Well, before rockets made by the dedicated workers at Michoud, who, as we just heard, were dedicated and firmly determined to make it right. Before those rockets could be launched, they had to be tested. And the site of the testing facility in southwest Mississippi was selected in part because of its proximity to Michoud and waterways. And the steady engine testing at what was to be named the Stennis Space Center is credited with putting an American on the moon first.
We're sitting in the middle of about 13,800 acres of land that NASA owns outright, fee simple. It was bought from the people that lived here at the time, and The center was created out of that. There's a restrictive easement for acoustic purposes that covers 125,000 acres. So think of the 13,800 as the center of the donut. The announcement that the site was going to be built was in October 1961. They started building in earnest in 1963, and we tested our first stage out here in 1966 in April. The last test was in November, early November of 1970. Then in the 1975 time frame, we started testing the Space Shuttle main engine. But we kept flying the shuttle until 2011. When the Space Launch System was formulated, we said, hey, we've got all these engines lying around left from the shuttle program, and we had spare parts to build a couple of new ones, so hey, let's just use that engine because it's a great proven engine. And so we started testing that configuration in 2015 and have been doing that since then. A Pathfinder that looks a lot like the core stage in terms of size and weight and center of gravity. It's sitting out there ready for us to do some lifting operations with it to make sure we can put it in there and do the things we think we have to do before we actually handle the flight hardware.
This gives you a good opportunity to see the two test positions on the B test stand. So on the right-hand side is the B1 test stand, on the left-hand side is B2. So eventually what we're going to be doing here at the B2 test stand is performing a green run test of the core stage for the SLS vehicle. So we're on level 8 of the test stand now, so this will actually be on the bottom side of the vehicle, so when the core stage gets installed in the test stand, this is the level where the engines will be, the RS-25 engines, and the nozzles will be right here.
Well, we hold on to them for the whole time. I tell my friends at Kennedy Space Center that anybody can launch one, you just turn it loose and it goes. Here, you really got to be made of stern stuff because we hold on to them for the whole duration. For an RS-25 test, for example, we're 500 seconds, which is a long time to watch a rocket run. And we have run 2,000 seconds here before, back in the 1980s. And that is a very, very long time. It's over 30 minutes. You're just getting hammered for the entire duration of the test. Your pants are flapping, your chest is thumping, and when you're done with that, it's kind of like a physical experience. It's very eye-opening. And we've had some astronaut candidates here a couple of weeks ago when they saw a test, and they're thinking about, hey, I'm going to be on top of that thing. It gets their attention the first time you see it.
We're obviously different than Kennedy Space Center. We don't launch at Stennis Space Center, so we're going to hold it down. The 4 RS-25 engines will fire vertically onto that big yellow structure that you see there. So what that is a very large steel manifolded flame deflector. Each one of those horizontal sections that you see there is an individual cooling water manifold. When we're testing the rocket, there'll be about 280,000 gallons per minute of water, cooling water, flowing to that deflector. And so when the rocket exhaust hits the water, it turns to steam. So a lot of what you see going up in the air will be the steam combined with the rocket exhaust or the flame from the engines. Again, this was all designed and built back in the 60s to resist the thrust load from the Saturn first stage, which was 7.5 million pounds of thrust. And so this place was originally designed to withstand 11 million pounds of thrust. The core stage will only produce about 2 million pounds of thrust, considerably less than what we did back in the day.
The thing that we did was we committed to testing the stages together, and we tested every one of them. Not only did we test a first copy, but we tested every one of them the same way at the same test stands, and then we set them down to the Cape and we put them together, and we had tremendous success doing that. The Russians did not with their moon rocket. They had a failure with every one that they tried to fly. So, that dedication to testing, I think, is a lot of what made Apollo successful.
And I got to tell you, it was exciting going there to Stennis and being able to get onto the stands thanks to Valerie over there at Stennis and Ryan, who gave us a great tour. Have any of you all been there for a test? Have you?
Yes.
Well, we're going to find out what it feels like right now. We're going to find out right now from Maury Vander, and you, as I understand, are the one who sits there in the control center and pushes the button to get it to go.
Yes.
And
You know, I get to be the guy that makes the ground shake and the and the smoke fly and the water and the rain fall. So it's a pretty cool job.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool job. So tell us, what does it feel like when you're about to push that button and realize all of that energy and power is going to be released? What does that feel like?
Kind of intimidating. You know, it's kind of the culmination of a long day. So we start early in the morning typically, and it takes hours to get the facility and the engine prepared to do that. So you're talking 4 or 5 hours worth of preparation, and you get to the final 5 minutes, and then all of a sudden the adrenaline kicks in, and you start realizing, this is about to happen. You spent the whole day with a bunch of other engineers and technicians, all doing their job at the highest level, and you get to be the one at the very end that says, okay, let's go ahead and make this thing go. You hit the button, and for the next, in the case of an RS-25, 500 seconds, you barely breathe. You're watching TV monitors expecting something to happen, praying it doesn't, but expecting it anyway. And at the end of that 500-second test, if an engine shuts down and you see the fire go away and it's all where it's supposed to be, it's kind of like, oh man, we did it again. So it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a great place to work.
And do you feel it where you are? I mean, you're not there on the stand. You're in a separate building.
No, we're typically inside of a concrete building for an RS-25, roughly a quarter mile away. You can still hear it, and it's a little bit of shaking, but the people that are outside,
you feel it.
You feel it. Your chest is pounding, like Randy said. Depending on where the wind conditions are and the atmospheric conditions, you may get rained on if you're in the wrong spot. So it's a pretty cool place to watch a test. If you haven't had an opportunity, you need to get out and do that.
Oh yeah, I definitely, I would love the invite. I definitely want to come see and experience it. Well, thanks so much for all of the great work that you guys do over there. You all gave us such a wonderful tour. It was really exciting to be out there to see what's going on. Can the public do tours also?
The public can do tours through our Infinity Science Center.
Okay.
They go out to go to Infinity. They can jump on a bus and they can do a tour that drives them around, and the specialists are excellent at giving them details of what the history of Stennis is. Mm-hmm. They can't get on the stands like you guys did because, like you said, you guys were special. But they can get within a quarter mile of one and actually see it. And it's pretty good stuff. And if the timing is exactly right and there is a test going on, they can actually sit there and watch it.
It's really fascinating, and it's just important, great work that you do and continue to do. Thanks so much.
Thank
you. Really appreciate you telling us that. So I know testing is going to continue. As you saw the Pathfinder there preparing to test the core stage for what's called the SLS. Tell us about that.
The Space Launch System is going to be the most powerful rocket in the world. We're going to go the furthest we've ever gone. We're going to circle the Earth and then go across the backside of the moon. I joke and say, well, Lil Wayne beat us there already. But we're going to go to the backside of the moon, and then we're going to bring that back home to be able to look at it. So that's going to be the first mission, and that mission is slated for 2020.
And so what is planned then beyond the launch of the SLS? I mean, from what I understand, and we had a chance to talk to Randy about it pretty much when we did the interview with him, it's to also have the astronauts who go on the moon to just fly back to like a space station that's right there, and then ultimately that would be sort of a jump start to Mars. Is that what you're looking at?
So it's kind of pieced out in phases, and so that first phase would be to build a habitat around the moon and the moon gravitational force, and then have our astronauts in that particular area, so to get back to the moon. And right now we're slated to go back to the moon for 2024. So that's the first big push, to put the first woman on the moon and then the next man back on the moon. So that's really exciting for that. And then the gateway itself, they'll start building that. And then our goal is to start heading toward Mars in 2030, 2040 timeframe.
And so the gateway is what, the moon space station? Is that, I'm sort of saying in layman terms here, but.
Yeah, it looks like another space station, right? It'll be able to dock with either commercial crew and then whatever else we're having to dock with there.
All right, so for us to continue this development and exploration of space, we need to have the engineers and the scientists to do that. That's where you come in, and I know you work on that too, is really trying to engender interest in STEM, in science, technology, engineering, and math in our young folks. And you have a program called STEM NOLA, and you have events one Saturday a month here in New Orleans. Are you on the North Shore now too? Or
pretty much across the state now.
Are you now?
Yes,
that's
we
great.
founded STEM NOLA over 5 years ago to expose, inspire, engage communities in hands-on STEM. In the last 5 years, we've engaged over 35,000 kids.
Wow, that's
Our
amazing.
kids have to be exposed before they can even dream about what's possible. The beautiful part about the Apollo and what Kennedy did was that he gave the nation an aspiration of something to shoot for. He said, in 10 years, we're going to put a man on the moon. What are we inspiring our kids to do now? And the goal for us is to make sure, we live in a country that makes sure that every kid touches a football or basketball before kindergarten. My vision is to make sure that every kid touches STEM
like
before they go to
rockets. Let's take some
kindergarten.
pictures right now.
Yes.
I mean, let's take a look at some pictures of one of the STEM NOLA events. I think it might have been Rocket Day. We see kids with a lot of rockets there.
Yes, as a matter of fact, every year we have a big Rocket Day on July 13th this year, presented by Boeing. We're going to have a Rocket Day in partnership with City Park, where we have nearly 200 kids shooting rockets. Our first Rocket Day in 2013, we actually brought an astronaut down, Dr. Jeanette Epps. But the kids get to meet people like Dr. Horton and the people that's building the rockets and the engines at Stennis with Boeing, Lockheed Martin. They come out and the kids work with them to shoot water rockets, compressed air rockets, then a solid rockets that go as high as 1,000 feet in the sky.
Oh, the kids must really enjoy all that.
Well, no, I enjoy it. See, they don't understand. It's about me. I enjoy it. It's the only way I can get to do it. The kids really enjoy it.
But you guys have other things that you work with on different sides. I know you work with the workings of the heart, the body, various things.
So the thing is, I tell people I have a PhD in mechanical engineering. I hate electrical engineering. I hate chemistry. So just because your kid doesn't like chemistry, that doesn't mean they can't be an engineer. So what we try to do on the second Saturday of every month is have some type of themed event, whether it's around biology and a dissection of the heart with Dr. Eric Griggs and other doctors, or whether it's force in motion, where we bring local engineers who used to work for Ford and things and build a car. We even have magnets where they build maglevs, simple machines. We just had an amazing day for the first time. We called it the Art of STEM, where the kids actually built Mardi Gras floats, and each kid got a remote control truck to pull a float, and they learned about electrochemiluminescence, where you know how these things light up, and really brought the art and the STEM together in a way that's beautiful.
So what age group?
We go from pre-K 4 to 12, but we're working now to create a 0 to 4 corner. We're trying to create a cradle to career pipeline. We want kids exposed to STEM in the womb all the way throughout the pipeline. And at our events on Saturday, we have the K to 12 kids. We pay college kids to volunteer. We've put over $600,000 in the hands of college kids over the last 5 years. And then we have STEM professionals volunteer, so we call that vertical mentoring. So at any given time, we have nearly 400 people in a gym, and they're experiencing the whole possibility of whether it's being a college student or whether it's being a professional.
So you really help grow in those workers of the workforce of Michoud and Stennis for the future then.
Well, we want our kids, especially in New Orleans and especially in Louisiana, to know that they can dream, but they also can come home and help to create the next economy for their city and their state.
Because it does exist here. I mean,
it exists.
A lot of folks in this region they're just not aware of the fact of the role that you guys have played, that Stennis and Michoud have played in the space program, on the space program, and it continues.
And that's why we're having a Rocket Day, so stories like the Apollo can be told. So individuals like the retirees can come out and tell these stories. So kids can touch them and feel them and know what's possible and know that they can do it too.
And we have some young folks in our audience right now who are really very interested in science and plan to be working in the world of space. First, let's go to Abby Tassin. And Abby, you sort of have it in your blood. You're sitting next to your grandfather, who we've heard from, and your dad also is working over at Michoud. So I could sort of see where you grew interested in it. What do you plan to do?
Well, first let me start off by talking about why, I chose aerospace engineering. So, my grandfather, he, worked on the Apollo program and also the space shuttle program. My dad also worked on the space shuttle program and is now working on the Orion program. And so I grew up, going to the Michoud facility for space days, seeing all the things be built, and I thought it was just so cool. But it wasn't until my dad took me to a space shuttle launch when I was 11 years old that I knew I wanted to be an aerospace engineer.
And so that's your future, aerospace engineering.
Yes, ma'am.
And you're going to be a senior soon, right?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. So I'm currently at the University of Alabama studying aerospace engineering with minors in mechanical engineering and mathematics. And so I hope, I chose the University of Alabama because it did have aerospace engineering. Being a native from New Orleans, I was expected to go to LSU, but Unfortunately, when I was looking at colleges, I realized that no college in the state of Louisiana had aerospace engineering as a major. And so I was looking around and found the University of Alabama. It's still close to home, so that's why I chose it.
Okay, do you want to be an astronaut, or you just want to work on
I don't
Earth?
think I want to be an astronaut, but I definitely do want to continue to work on the space program. I'm currently an intern for Lockheed Martin at Michoud. I'm a stress analyst for the Orion program, so kind of get some hands-on experience, and it's a lot of fun. And I hope to continue to work on the space program when I graduate in 2020.
Best of luck to you, Abby.
Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And I see proud Grandpa and Papa right there too, and Mama too. Thanks a lot, Abby. And standing next to you are also two folks who aspire to be involved in space. We have Brian and then Anala, and they have been involved in Dr. Mackie's STEM NOLA program. So Brian, what interests you in space? Are you interested in working in a job in dealing with space?
I'm interested in going to be an astronaut when I grow up.
An astronaut, so you do want to be an astronaut. That is just really exciting for you. And Anala, what about you?
I also want to try and become an astronaut when I grow up because ever since I was little, like when I was about 3 years old, I was always interested in learning about the planets and things like that.
Well, we wish you all the luck and continue with your education with that. I know Dr. Mackie, you're involved with Dr. Mackie's programs in STEM NOLA, so you'll get to learn a lot. And I know having Dr. Mackie behind you, he'll definitely push you far, huh?
We're pushing.
Well, good luck to it, and it's wonderful hearing from all of you guys. You are our future. Thanks so much. And I know, and quickly, we wanted to also mention, thanks guys, we wanted to mention that Nunez Community College has a program
Yeah,
there.
so Nunez has recently started their Aerotech program, and it's a short program through a certificate program, but it's to help those who are interested to kind of get that training and go into it. And so we're looking at really being able to bring aerospace to the state, at least at one of the universities, because we can't have too many more of ours going to the University of Alabama.
and if you would see Randy's house, he's definitely an LSU fan. It's all over. All right, well, right by the Louisiana-Mississippi border off I-10 is a place where kids of all ages can learn about space and planet Earth and the wonders of science. It's the Infinity Science Center, and let's take a tour.
We consider our mission to inspire the next generation to either go make boot prints on Mars or discover the human DNA or whatever. But our job is to inspire kids to do and be more than they thought they could. Our main galleries are divided into two categories, Earth and space. And so they learn about the processes that enable life on this planet and how to extrapolate how do we find life on other planets, how do we go there, how do we return safely. In the Earth Gallery, one of the things they can do is go on a simulated ride down through the water column in the Gulf of Mexico. It's called Deep Ocean Explorer. They start out on a mission to survey the biologics in the water, but a klaxon sounds, an emergency goes off, and there's a blowout preventer on the seafloor that needs to be addressed. So they dive down quickly, deploy ROVs, and then they have 4 minutes to solve the problem. We serve as an official visitor center for the NASA John C. Stennis Space Center, and the rockets you see behind me are models, 1/10 scale models of the ones that took us to the moon. And beyond outside in our rocket park, you'll see the first stage of the Saturn V, the actual first stage, and with all 5 of its F1 engines that powered us to the moon. We have the Apollo 4 capsule. It was the very first capsule. It was unmanned, but the first capsule to be launched on a full stack Saturn V. Our technology is moving, everything depends on coding, for example, and kids need to know that. Science is the building blocks that help us understand the universe around us, and our universe is pretty complex. So science is that key thing that I think we all need to know. People used to think it was literature, but I'm going to go for science. One of the ways we measure our days is how many aha moments we've delivered. And it is the most thrilling thing on the planet to see a child have an aha moment here. And they happen every day, every hour, every minute almost.
that great little face in the spacesuit. I mean, so many people do drive by Infinity Center and say, oh, I'm going to go there one day. Well, go there. It's a really fun place to be, and it's so educational for kids, like I said, of all ages. All right. We are going to wrap up our conversation right now. I'm going to ask you guys just for some final thoughts, if you could, about 30 seconds each. What do you think the role of this region is going to be in the future of space exploration? Cindy, start with you.
I think it will continue as long as large space launch vehicles are needed, and they will be, to the moon, to Mars. We will be here, along with Stennis. Along with Stennis, right?
Yes. I mean, we maintain a very important role in space exploration. One real quick thing I wanted to touch on, and I'll have you do that. Private companies, real quickly, if you can, before you give me the wrap up. I know we have private companies now working with NASA also in doing space exploration.
Oh yes. First, to be able to truly be able to make the impact that we want to make as Americans, and to be able to stay ahead of the space race, we can't really do that alone. And so it's really important that the commercial crews that have come on, that they're advancing as well, and that they're hiring, putting people into the field as well, just simply so that we can stay ahead of it.
All right. Calvin, what do you think?
Okay, I definitely think with Stennis and Michoud, with just the amount of space out there, there'll always be a presence here for us to participate in the large-scale space program. But we have to make sure as a region that we are creating the next explorers and the next innovators and creators to take those jobs. We have to make sure, when you start looking at, they're already estimating that 50% of the jobs that exist today will be irrelevant in the next 10 to 20 years due to automation, robotics, and other things, advanced materials. We have to make sure that our kids have the 21st century skills of communication, creativity, collaboration, and communication, such that whatever job become available, whatever company they want to create, they have the skills such that they can not only participate in the future, but create the future.
And the future can be here, too.
And the future will be here.
All right, all right. I want to thank you guys. It's been just such a great, fascinating conversation. Thank you all, the audience there. So many of you have helped make the nation's venture into space very successful, and some are taking us to the next generation, the next adventure for the near future, or preparing to do so. And of course, I want to thank the viewers at home. Hope that now you have a better understanding of how our neighbors have played a big part in the national effort of Chasing the Moon. And be sure to watch the PBS American Experience series Chasing the Moon here on WYES. You can go to WYES.org for dates and times. And thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. So glad to have you.
Chasing the Moon, the Crescent City Connection, is made possible by WGBH.